Welcome to the Calabash Diaries. Today, we journey back 3,000 years to ancient Egypt, a kingdom born from the Nile, shaped by gods, and carried by the hands of a brilliant African people who built wonders that the world still admires today. For over 3,000 years, the land of Egypt stood as a beacon of power and beauty, a land of farmers and pharaohs, of hieroglyphs and golden tombs, of mighty queens and brave warriors. But who were the original Egyptians? How did they rise from small villages to become one of the greatest civilizations in human history? Join us as we open the Calabash and journey back in time to meet the people behind the pyramids, to uncover their secrets, and to witness how this extraordinary African civilization rose and eventually fell. More than 5,000 years ago, long before pyramids and pharaohs, the land of Egypt was just a long stretch of green along the Nile. The very first Egyptians were African people who gathered around the river because it gave them food, water, and fertile soil. Ancient art, mummies, and DNA show that the earliest Egyptians had brown to dark brown skin tones like the people living along the Nile today. They were a mix of indigenous African groups, dark-skinned Nubians, mixed with Saharan pastoralists who had to migrate when the Sahara dried up. They followed the river's promise of life. They spoke early Afro-Asiatic languages, herded cattle, and painted their stories on rocks long before the pyramids. Slowly, these villages grew. They learned to farm, to fish, and to build homes. Over centuries, these communities came together to form one of the world's first great kingdoms, ancient Egypt. How did they form a kingdom? First, small farming communities appeared. Over time, these villages joined together for safety and trade. By about 3100 BCE, a leader known as Nama or Menes united Upper Egypt, south, and Lower Egypt, north, into one kingdom. Before they built pyramids, early Egyptians built cattle enclosures, painted caves and shrines to the spirits of the river and sky. They called their land Kemet, meaning the Black Land, after the rich, dark soil that the Nile left behind every year. Every year, the Nile River flooded its banks, leaving behind rich, dark soil that the Egyptians called Kemet, meaning the Black Land. It was this gift of the Nile that made Egypt bloom, where everything else was desert. Long before pyramids and pharaohs, Egyptian children played in mud huts, weaving reed toys, while their parents learned to tame the land. These early villages learned something magical: work together, and the river will feed everyone. Two lands grew strong: Lower Egypt, where papyrus reeds swayed in the delta, and Upper Egypt, where tall cliffs rose over the narrow Nile Valley. For many years, these two lands were rivals, but then came Narmer, a king who wore two crowns: the white crown of Upper Egypt, the red crown of Lower Egypt. By wearing both crowns, Narmer said, "We are one people now." This was one of the first times in history that two nations became a single kingdom under one flag. And so, the pharaoh was born, not just a king, but a living god. Egyptians believed that the pharaoh's heartbeat was connected to the gods themselves. To disobey him was to bring chaos to the world. This was the beginning of a kingdom that would last for over 3,000 years, where every wall and statue still whispers its story today. Fun fact: the earliest Egyptians believed cats had divine spirits long before pyramids existed. In Narmer's time, some families already kept wild cats as guardians of their grain from rats and snakes. The early Egyptians loved board games, long before chess or Monopoly. One of their favorite games was Senet, played by both kings and villagers. Some historians think they believed winning at Senet was a way to please the gods. Unknown fact: the very first crown of Egypt, the white crown of Upper Egypt, may have been inspired by the tall crowns worn by Nubian chiefs. This shows how closely linked these cultures were from the start. If you could travel back to ancient Egypt, you would see why the Nile was called the father of life. It wasn't just a river, it was the beating heart of an entire civilization. When the waters rose, the Egyptians called it Akhet, the season of flooding. Children would cheer as the water covered the fields, because they knew when it went down, the soil would be so rich that plants would grow like magic. In the Pere, season of planting, families worked together. They planted wheat for bread, flax for linen, barley for beer, and even papyrus to make paper and ropes. During Shemu, season of harvest, the river shrank and boats came alive. You'd see sleek wooden boats, sails of white linen catching the wind, and oars slicing the blue water and carrying people, food, and treasures. Fishermen cast their nets, while children played along the riverbank. Merchants traveled south to Nubia and east to the Red Sea, bringing back gold, incense, and exotic animals. People built mud brick houses in small villages. Their lives followed the rhythm of the river, plant when it floods, harvest when it dries. This rich land gave Egypt so much food that they could trade with faraway lands, making them wealthy long before the pyramids rose. The Nile didn't just feed the Egyptians, it gave them time to dream, invent, and create art. It was this gift of time and abundance that allowed Egypt to become a land of wonders. Fun facts, rare. Egyptian fishermen sometimes sang to the fish, believing the music calmed them into the nets. Children made toys from dried mud, shaped like hippos and crocodiles, copying the animals they saw on the riverbanks. Wealthy Egyptians loved lotus flowers. They wore them on their heads during parties to smell good while they danced. To the ancient Egyptians, pyramids were not just buildings. They were symbols of eternity, stone miracles that promised their king would live forever among the stars. The first pyramids were built as tombs for their kings, called pharaohs. The largest, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was built for Pharaoh Khufu more than 4,500 years ago. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, also called Cheops, is so big that for over 3,800 years, it was the tallest structure on Earth. The blocks are huge, each weighing as much as 2 to 3 cars, and yet they were moved with nothing more than sleds, ropes, and determination. It took tens of thousands of workers many years to build. They cut massive limestone blocks, moved them on sleds, and stacked them one by one. The pyramids were more than tombs. They were like stairs to the afterlife, where pharaohs could join the gods. Inside, treasures and food were buried with the dead, so they could enjoy them in the next world. Fun cultural detail. The workers who built the pyramids were not slaves. They were skilled farmers who came to work during the flood season when fields were underwater. They were paid in bread, beer, and onions. Archaeologists found small clay marks on pyramid blocks with the names of worker gangs like Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure, almost like team names today. Inside the pyramids, the walls glowed with colorful paintings. There were pictures of servants, music, and food, everything the pharaoh would need in the afterlife. Unknown facts. The narrow shafts in the Great Pyramid were aligned with stars, making the pyramid a giant celestial map. Ancient Egyptians believed the pyramid's shape itself was a sunbeam frozen in stone, pointing to heaven. The pyramids still stand today, whispering across time, telling us, this is what happens when a civilization dreams big and works together. The people of ancient Egypt believed that life was a gift from the gods. They worshipped many gods and goddesses, each with a special role. Ra, the sun god, who sailed across the sky in a golden boat across the heavens by day and through a dark underworld by night, battling chaos so the sun could rise again. Isis, the loving goddess of magic and healing, is also called the Great Mother. Children whispered prayers to her when they were scared, and healers painted her symbol on the sick. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, is referred to as gentle and green-skinned. He ruled the land of the dead, but he was also a god of farming. When crops grew tall, Egyptians believed Osiris was smiling. Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky. Fun cultural detail: temples weren't just for prayer, they were schools, hospitals, libraries, and even banks. Priests bathed 4 times a day in sacred pools to stay pure before speaking to the gods. Unknown facts: many gods started as local guardians of villages, but as Egypt united, these gods were combined into families and legends. Children wore little charms of gods around their necks, and some families kept small home altars, a practice not always written about in books. Cats were sacred because they were linked to the goddess Bastet. When a family cat died, they shaved their eyebrows as a sign of mourning. Festivals for the gods were grand. People danced in the streets, sang songs, and lit lamps that floated on the Nile, turning the river into a path of stars. The gods were not just distant powers, they were family, woven into every part of daily life. Every temple, every festival, every prayer connected the people to their gods. The pharaoh was seen as a bridge between the gods and humans, so obeying him was like obeying the gods. Life in ancient Egypt wasn't just about kings and pyramids. Beyond the temples and the golden palaces, ancient Egypt was built on the laughter of families, and families were the heart of their world. Children ran barefoot in the dust, their laughter mixing with the braying of donkeys and the rustling of palm leaves. Toys were simple but creative: carved animals, spinning tops, dolls with beads for hair. Some even had tiny pull-along wooden crocodiles with moving jaws. Unknown fun facts: board games like Senet were a family favorite. These games were thought to tell your fortune about the afterlife. Fathers loved to teach their children how to swim in the Nile, farm, fish, write, or weave, while mothers braided their daughters' hair in patterns that told stories about their family. Houses were made from sun-baked mud bricks with flat roofs. People often slept on the roof during hot nights, watching the stars. Wealthier families decorated their walls with colorful scenes of birds, flowers, and feasts. Meals were simple: bread, dates, onions, and sometimes fish. Bread and beer were staples. The bread was coarse, sometimes with grains of sand mixed in from grinding. Honey was a luxury treat. Families often ate together on low stools, using their hands instead of spoons. Children were treasured. Even in poor families, they were given amulets for protection. At night, after work was done, the family gathered. The father might tell tales of the gods, the mother hummed songs, and sometimes they all clapped and danced to drums. Rare cultural insight. Ancient Egyptians loved perfume and scented oils. Families would rub oil made from lotus flowers on their hair and skin to smell sweet during the heat. They also kept pet monkeys and geese in the courtyard as part of daily life. In these small homes, filled with laughter, music, and stories, the soul of Egypt lived. In the final days of ancient Egypt, one name shone brightest: Cleopatra VII. In the golden halls of Alexandria, a young queen rose to face the storm of empires. Cleopatra VII Philopator, born in 69 BCE, was not just a queen, she was a scholar, linguist, and strategist. She spoke 9 languages, including Egyptian, Greek, Aramaic, and Latin. She studied astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and even chemistry. Unlike many rulers before her, Cleopatra chose to speak the Egyptian language to her people, earning their loyalty. Rare fun fact: Cleopatra was not famed for beauty alone. Roman writers admitted it was her intelligence and charisma that made her unforgettable. The royal court of Alexandria was a world of science, art, and debate. perfumed fountains, libraries of scrolls, golden mosaics, and exotic animals made it a wonder of the ancient world. In 48 BCE, Alexandria, the dazzling jewel of the Mediterranean, was more than a city. It was a city of marble palaces, golden lighthouses, and libraries that held the wisdom of the world. But within its beauty, chaos brewed. Cleopatra VII, the 21-year-old queen, and Ptolemy XIII, her 13-year-old brother, had been forced to co-rule after the death of their father, Ptolemy XII. However, their partnership quickly dissolved into bitterness. Cleopatra was intelligent, multilingual, and fiercely independent. Ptolemy's advisors, worried about her influence, spread rumors that she was conspiring to rule alone. By 49 BCE, they forced her out of Alexandria, leaving her in exile in the desert. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, pursuing his rival Pompey, who had just been assassinated on Egyptian shores, Cleopatra saw an opening. She knew Caesar valued boldness and intelligence above all. To reach him, she could not simply walk through guarded palace gates, so she came up with a plan worthy of the goddess Isis herself. Under the cover of night, she slipped back into Alexandria. A loyal servant rolled her up inside a luxurious Persian carpet, or some say a linen sack, and carried her into Caesar's private quarters. When the rug was unrolled, she tumbled out at his feet, dusty, defiant, and unafraid. Caesar, stunned by her audacity, laughed and listened. That very night, the two forged an alliance. The following months erupted into the Alexandrian War. Caesar and Cleopatra's forces barricaded themselves in the royal palace as Ptolemy's army surrounded them. Fire consumed parts of the great library of Alexandria. It was a brutal siege of cunning, diplomacy, and street fighting. In 47 BCE, the final confrontation came at the Nile. Ptolemy XIII's forces broke, and as he fled, he drowned in the river that had once sustained Egypt's greatness. When the battle ended, Cleopatra stood as queen once more, now with a Roman protector. For a brief but powerful moment, Egypt remained independent. Cleopatra's gamble not only changed her destiny, but also delayed Rome's complete takeover of Egypt for almost 2 decades. Rare fun fact: Egyptian murals later depicted Cleopatra as a falcon-headed goddess presenting a scroll representing her bold plan to a Roman eagle. This shows how deeply the people admired her wit over violence. After Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, the balance of power in Rome fractured. Cleopatra, now an experienced queen and mother to Caesar's son Caesarion, returned to Alexandria to safeguard her kingdom. Egypt had become a glittering prize in Rome's struggle for dominance. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, in modern Turkey, to question her loyalty. Instead of coming humbly, Cleopatra sailed up the Cydnus River on a barge covered in gold and purple sails, perfumed with incense, with musicians playing flutes and women dressed as nymphs fanning her. Antony, expecting a fearful queen, was mesmerized by her confidence and theater. The two quickly found common cause. Antony needed Egypt's wealth, its grain and gold, to challenge Octavian, the future Augustus, for control of Rome. Cleopatra saw in Antony a chance to restore Egypt's former glory and ensure her son's claim to power. Their relationship was sealed by mutual ambition and a deep personal connection. They envisioned creating a grand Eastern Mediterranean empire, a state that would combine Egyptian wealth, Greek culture, and Roman military power. Antony even gave Cleopatra vast territories once held by Rome, effectively making her queen of much of the Eastern Mediterranean. Rare fun fact: Cleopatra introduced Egyptian celebrations into Roman-style banquets, blending cultures. At one famous feast in Alexandria, she bet Antony she could spend 10 million sesterces on a single meal. She dissolved one of her enormous pearls, valued as a fortune, in vinegar and drank it, winning the bet and stunning all present. This act became legendary as a symbol of her audacity and wealth. For a few years, their combined forces dominated the East. Alexandria was once again the center of culture, learning, and power. However, their growing strength alarmed Rome. Octavian declared war, portraying Antony as a traitor bewitched by Cleopatra. This conflict would ultimately lead to the fateful Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's forces defeated them, setting the stage for their tragic end. The Battle of Actium was fought on the Ionian Sea, near modern Greece. It was more than a clash of armies. It was a battle of civilizations. On one side stood the wealth of the East, Egyptian gold, ships painted with Egyptian falcons, and soldiers wearing bright linen tunics. On the other, Octavian's disciplined Roman legions. Cleopatra herself commanded one of the largest warships, her sails of Tyrian purple, and deck covered with golden statues of Egyptian gods. But despite their numbers, the battle quickly turned. Octavian's admiral Agrippa cut off their supply lines, and a sudden change in wind trapped Antony's fleet. In the chaos, Cleopatra made a calculated retreat, knowing that preserving her fleet and wealth was the only way to fight another day. Antony, torn between command and love, abandoned the battle to follow her. This moment sealed their fate. When Octavian entered Egypt in 30 BCE, he brought not just soldiers but propaganda. He promised to free Egypt from what he called Cleopatra's tyranny. Yet, Alexandria greeted him with eerie silence. The once bustling city was subdued. Antony, realizing all was lost, died in Cleopatra's arms after stabbing himself. Cleopatra, knowing Octavian planned to take her to Rome and refusing to be paraded as a captive, prepared a final act. In her royal chamber, surrounded by images of Isis, she took her own life. Ancient accounts say it was by the bite of an asp, Egyptian cobra, a symbol of divine royalty, though some historians believe she used poison. Rare fun fact, after her death, Octavian allowed her and Antony to be buried together, acknowledging their loyalty to each other. This was the last royal burial of an Egyptian queen. With Cleopatra gone, it marked the end of Egypt as a free kingdom. The last link of 3,000 years of pharaonic tradition was broken, and Rome took control. Egypt became a Roman province. The riches of the Nile flowed into Rome, and Alexandria, once the center of science and culture, now served a foreign empire. However, the legend of Cleopatra lived on, her charisma and ambition immortalized. Even Octavian admitted, she fascinated even in death. Cleopatra's brilliance and courage, however, left a mark so deep that more than 2,000 years later, her name still evokes power and mystery. When Octavian's soldiers stormed Alexandria in 30 BCE, much of the city's royal district descended into chaos. Ancient sources describe fires consuming scrolls, art, and royal treasures, and amid this chaos, a small group of servants and priests is said to have fled through hidden tunnels leading out of the city. From these dark days comes one of Egypt's most enduring folk legends, the Lost Princess. Some say she was Cleopatra's secret daughter, perhaps a twin to Caesarion, hidden to avoid the Roman assassins who killed him. Others believe she was no royal at all, but a daughter of a powerful priestly family from Thebes, entrusted with carrying the House of Life scrolls, ancient papyri containing astronomical charts, medicine, and incantations so old that even the Ptolemies barely understood them. What all versions share is this: she was spirited away by guardians on camelback, deep into the southern deserts, disappearing into the lands beyond Nubia. Rare oral traditions, still whispered by desert Bedouins today, tell of a silent caravan that left Alexandria under the light of a crescent moon. Its camels carried more than people. They carried golden statues of Isis, papyrus scrolls wrapped in linen, and sealed jars of blue pigment from the royal workshops. Their destination was unknown. Some say they followed the Nile south into Nubia. Others claim they crossed the Red Sea into Arabia, or even sailed to India. Even as Egypt became Rome's breadbasket, villagers in Upper Egypt passed on a prophecy: when the blood of the last queen walks the earth again, the two lands will rise. This belief inspired resistance movements for centuries. The legend gave hope to people who refused to let their Egyptian identity be swallowed by Rome. Rare fun fact: 19th century explorers in Sudan recorded local stories of a white lady of the desert, a queenly figure who came from the north with papyrus scrolls and disappeared among the ancient Kushite pyramids. Whether coincidence or memory, it echoes the same story that began on that fateful night. Unknown. Cultural fact: ancient Egyptian beliefs held that as long as one drop of royal blood lived, Egypt's soul could never be fully conquered. This story gave hope to people who refused to let their culture die. As she fled, legends say the lost princess carried amulets of protection, a sistrum, sacred rattle, and a golden key to a hidden tomb. Some stories place her in Nubia, others in India or Ethiopia, where she lived in peace but kept the old traditions alive. Even today, in villages along the Nile, mothers tell their children about the hidden daughter of the Nile, saying she will return when Egypt needs her most. This mysterious tale, half history, half dream, reminds us that while empires fall, the spirit of a civilization never truly dies. As the sun sets over the Nile, our journey through the land of pyramids, gods, and kings comes to a close. But the magic of ancient Egypt lives on in every grain of desert sand. Fun. Closing fact: did you know that the ancient Egyptians believed the soul had 5 parts, and one of them, the Ka, needed food offerings even after death? That's why even now, in Upper Egypt, you'll see families leaving bread and water at old tomb sites. And so, from the mud brick villages of the Nile to the towering pyramids and golden temples, ancient Egypt wrote its name on the scrolls of time. Its pharaohs have turned to dust, its kingdoms have fallen, but the heartbeat of that civilization still pulses in the deserts, in the river, and in the stories we share. This has been another journey with us here at the Calabash Diaries. If the story of Egypt has left you in awe, then hold on, because there are many more hidden tales of Africa waiting to be told. Until next time, may the Nile's eternal waters guide your dreams.